Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to our eighth session of the fundamentals of organizing and writing academic research paper. So today we're going to move on to our next part of the journey in writing academic research paper, which is to focus on your discussion. So let me first go get the slide through. Okay, so this is the outline of lessons that we've been doing over the past many weeks. We have one more lesson to complete this set of series. There will be future series coming later stage. So today the focus is going to be on discussion. The session will be handled by, as usual, by three of us, but today's session again will be managed by myself and Ms. Fairunizan. So Prof. Brian will not be able to handle the session, so I will be handling the session today. So let me get the slides up. All right. So what we're going to be discussing today is to focus on a few important areas when we talk about outlining a discussion. Okay, the purpose and importance. Why is this important? What are the rules and contents? How do you organize and structure a discussion section of a publication? The overall objective, the problems that you need to avoid, and the limitation of the study. Then Ms. Fairunizan will let you go through some of the references that I think you should look at when you get the chance. So let's look at the purpose of a discussion section typically in any publication. Okay, the firstly is to interpret and describe the significance of your findings in light of what was already known about the research problem that is being investigated. Secondly, you want to explain any new understanding or fresh insight about the problem after you have taken the findings into consideration. So you outline that clearly in the discussion section. Thirdly, you want to, the discussion will always connect to the introduction. So remember, your introduction chapter must be well connected with the introduction. So that is why sometimes you will write the introduction the last, or you'll have a first outline and then you'll improve your introduction because it must be connected back with your findings. So it has to connect with the introduction by way of the research question or hypothesis that you have proposed and the literature that you have reviewed. All this got to be tied down in your discussion. So it does not just simply repeat or rearrange the introduction, but the discussion should always explain how your study has moved the reader's understanding of the research problem. Okay, how it has moved the understanding of the research problem forward from where you left off at the end of the introduction. So in the introduction, you are just introducing, these are the challenges, these are the objectives, and these are the problems that you want to solve. And then your discussion is now trying to verify, okay, from the results, this is how it has tied down back to your, what you have outlined in the introduction section. So why is this discussion section important? So this section is often considered the most important part of a research paper because it most effectively demonstrates your ability as a researcher to think critically about an issue, to develop creative solutions to problems based on the findings, and also to formulate a deeper, more profound understanding of the research problem that you are trying to study. The discussion section is also where you explore the underlying meaning of your research, its possible implications in other areas of studies, and the possible improvements that can be made in order to further develop the concerns of your research. This is also the section where you need to present the importance of your study and how it may be able to contribute to or even fill existing gaps in the field of study. If appropriate, the discussion section is also where you will state how the findings from your study have revealed new gaps in the literature that had not been previously exposed or adequately described. So this part of the paper is not strictly governed by objective reporting of information, but rather it is where you can engage in creative thinking about the issue through evidence-based interpretation of the findings. So your results section earlier, the earlier chapter, becomes important, and you're trying to critically think to see why is the finding such. Okay, so this is where you will infuse your results with some meaning. Okay, so there are some general rules in writing the discussion section. Okay, some of these are quite common, and by now you should know, because generally what you see here is the same for most of the section as well. Do not verbose. Okay, verbose here is don't be too long-winded when you try to write your discussion, and don't be repetitive of the same information written in a different way. Be very precise, be concise. Okay, so you want to make your points clear, so you don't need to beat around the bush. Avoid using complicated words and jargons when you are explaining the discussion. Be straight to the point what it means, and be logical in the way how you present your findings. So your discussion must follow based on your results. The way how the result has been arranged, the discussion will follow this similar logical thought when you discuss. Use present. So this is quite straightforward because the studies have been conducted. So you have to use the present verb tense, especially when you are trying to establish the facts on the result on the study. Use subheadings if you need to organize. If your discussion, they have a lot of different sections of the discussion you're explaining, you can use subheadings to guide the reader. So it's not necessarily the discussion must be one heading that everything dumped inside there. No, you can have subheading to describe. Let's say you want to explain the demographic findings, so you get one heading on demographic findings. Then you go to the actual findings. If you're doing a hypothesis test or certain analysis, what was the discussion about, then you can have a subheading on that particular test as well. So there are different ways of doing it. So under the contents of the discussion section, also remember that your main aim is to explain the result. Okay, so your comments on whether or not the results were expected, and present the explanation for the results. Go into greater depth when explaining the findings that were unexpected or especially very profound. If appropriate, you need to also note any unusual or unanticipated patterns or trends that has emerged from your results, and explain the meaning. Why do you think your findings were such? References to previous research. Okay, so this is also as important in the discussion. So this is where all the literature that you have done before becomes handy. Compare your result with the findings from other studies, or use the studies to support a claim. So you have to cite it. So based on the study of this, you found that your study have contradicted the findings, or have actually exposed some new gaps that has been lacking in the previous study. So you can actually support your finding by looking at the existing literature. So this can include revisiting key sources already cited in your literature review section, and then use that back to support in your discussion, or save them to, if you think some of it you've not used it, but you can save them to cite it later in this section if they are more important to compare with your results. So you can cite the context and the background information as well. The third bullet here is deduction. Okay, a claim deduction here is talking about claim for how the result can be applied more generally. So this depends on what kind of study you are doing. If you are doing a qualitative study, you will use what we call an inductive reasoning approach. Okay, so when you look at a qualitative study, if you look at the diagram here, from observation, okay, in a typical qualitative study, you will observe, you look at the pattern and themes appearing, then you will make up a hypothesis and that becomes a theory. So the inductive approach or the qualitative approach is more of theory building, okay? Whereas if you look at the deductive approach, which is what most quant researchers, the quantitative researchers do, it is basically testing the theory. You already got a theory, you already got a hypothesis, you create a hypothesis, and then you want to see the observation by doing a series of survey and tests, and then you confirm it. So that is a deductive approach. Okay, so these two reasoning is different. So when the way you present your findings also is going to be slightly different, comparing the inductive reasoning approach versus a deductive reasoning approach. And then of course hypothesis, where you create a general claim or possible conclusion arising from the result, which may be proved or disapproved in the subsequent research. So the finding is valid for that particular research. So you may have another researchers coming to prove your hypothesis wrong, which is quite common in research. So as more and more research is done, you will see different people are trying to prove certain discussion that you have produced in your publication, whether it's correct or whether it is not accurate. So if you look at the organization and structure itself, you need to keep the following sequential points in mind as you organize and write the discussion section of your paper. Think of your discussion as an inverted pyramid. Okay, organize the discussion. You start from something more general, okay, inverted, like a pyramid upside down. And then you go from general to the specific, linking your findings, as I've said earlier, to the literature, then to theory, then to practice. Okay, so try to always link it back. So don't just talk about the discussion, but you never link to the theory, you never link to the literature, and then you never link to the actual application. So what is the impact at the ground level? Okay, use the same key terms, mode of narration and verb tenses, which is the present tense that you use when you are describing the research problem in the introduction. Begin by briefly restating, okay, when you start the discussion, restate the research problem you're investigating and answer all the research questions underpinning the problem that you have posed in the introduction section. Describe the patterns, principles, and relationships shown by each major findings and place them in a proper perspective. So the sequencing of providing this information is important, okay? Because first state this is the answer that you've got from the finding, and then the relevant result, and then look at why is it such, and cite or what are the literature to support or maybe contradict to the existing literature. So try to refer the reader to whichever figure or tables that was discussed in the results section for the interpretation, so that they know which table are you talking about, because the table may be in the results section. So you can say, based on the discussion in table 1 or table 10, and this is what it basically means. The order of interpreting follow the sequence in the same order that you have put it in the result section. A good discussion section will also include analysis of any unexpected findings. This paragraph normally when you write should begin with a description of the unexpected findings, followed by a brief interpretation as to why you believe it appeared, and if necessary, is its possible significance in relation to the overall study. So if more than one unexpected findings emerge during the study, then you may need to describe each of them in the order they appear as you gather the data. So don't think that unexpected finding is something that you will not be describing. You can still describe it, because based on the findings, you realize that this is something that is unique that has come out from your study. So before concluding the discussion section, it is also sometimes good to identify some potential limitation and weakness. Sometimes you in some publication, you put that even in the conclusion chapter. So wherever you put in, but what is important is the limitation weakness is also important to be discussed. Comment on their relative importance in relation to your overall interpretation of the result, and if necessary, note how they may affect the validity of the findings. So avoid using an apologetic tone, okay, where you say, oh, you don't need to apologize because you couldn't do something because you have certain limitation. You just need to be honest and be self-critical on why it appeared that way. So the discussion section should end with a concise summary of the principal implications of the finding, regardless of the statistical significance. So give a brief explanation of about why you believe the findings and conclusion of your study are important and how they support broader knowledge and understanding of the research problem. So this is important because this will actually demonstrate whether your data is adequate, is it generalizable, is there gaps that you may want to improve in the future. So so the overall objective of the discussion section should include all the following bullets that you see here. Number one, your discussion section must reiterate the research problem. Okay, you need to state the major findings. So you need to briefly reiterate for your readers the research problem or problem you're investigating and the method you have used to investigate them. And then quickly, you don't have to put it in depth, but just outline, this is the problem, this is the method that was used, and this is the findings that is coming out of it, and try to rationalize why. So you should write very succinct, very precise, but be direct in your explanation. Explain the meaning of the findings and why they are important. No one has thought as long and hard about your study as you have, because you have spent a lot of time. So many people may not go in depth, but in your case, since you have done this long enough, you will be able to put the real meaning of what this finding means. Systematically explain the meaning of the findings and why you believe they are actually important. So after reading the discussion section, you want the reader to think about the result. Okay, you don't want to force the reader to go through the paper multiple times to then figure out what you're trying to say. So you have to be very clear. So begin this part of the section by repeating what you consider to be your most important findings. The third bullet here, relate the findings to similar studies. So again, I've said your literature review. No study is so novel or unique or possesses such restricted focus that it is absolutely no relation to other previously published research. You may have, when we talk about COVID period, when the first research on COVID publication came out, people could not refer directly on the COVID case, but there are other similar cases that they can tie up to. The discussion section should relate your study findings to those of other studies, particularly if questions raised by previous studies served as the motivation for your study, and the finding of the other study will actually support your findings, which is good because it is going to strengthen the importance of your study result. Or they point out how your study differs. Okay, as I've said, you may get some alternate result, and you have to discuss that as well. The fourth one, consider alternative explanation of the findings. It is important to remember that the purpose of research is what? To discover, okay, and not just to prove. Okay, when writing the discussion section, you should carefully consider all possible explanation for the study result, rather than just those that fit your prior assumption or biases. Okay, so be clear that you can get a bad result, doesn't matter. As a researcher, you justify why did you get a bad result. Okay, acknowledge the study's limitation. It is far better for you to identify and acknowledge your study's limitation than to have them pointed out by your reader. So describe whether the findings can be generalized, your result to any other situation, if applicable to the method chosen. Then describe in detail problems you encountered in the method you use to gather the information. So note that any unanswered question or issues your study did not address, okay, mention it. If you say this is what you plan to do, but these are the areas there is still a gap that you could not get the answer to. Make suggestion for further research. Although your study may offer important insight about a particular research problem, other questions related to the problem likely may remain unanswered. So, so some unanswered questions may have now become more focused because of your study. So you should make suggestion for further research. So again, the further research in some publication is also parked under the conclusion chapter. So some of it they put it in the discussions. It depends on certain publication. So besides the literature review section, it is also important for you to always reference back all the research paper that has appeared or did not appear in the literature review back in the discussion section to support your findings. So this will further add strengthen the publication. So if a study that you cited disagrees with your findings, don't ignore it. Okay, you clearly can explain why the study's finding differ from yours. Why is the result totally opposite? Is it the context is different? Is it the methodology is different? Is it the sampling method is not exactly the same? So it can change. So don't be worried about it. What are the problems that you need to avoid? Number one, do not waste entire sentences restating your result. Okay, should remember whatever you write in any publication, any academic publication, it has to be very precise and not repetitive. Should you need to remind the reader of the findings to be discussed, use bridge sentences that relate the result of the interpretation. For instance, if you say an example, the lack of available housing to let's say here a single woman. I'm just reading from one of the research papers. The lack of available housing to single women with children in rural areas suggests that. Then move to the interpretation of the findings. So meaning to say, you don't have to read the actual findings because the actual finding is already in your result section. So you just use a general to bridge that finding, which is you say, okay, the finding basically show the lack of available housing for single women with children in rural areas. So that is the findings coming out. So you have actually referred it back and then immediately you interpret why. Then move on straight to the interpretation of the finding. You don't have to again go back to the actual results. Okay, so recommendations for further research, okay, the second point here to avoid can be included in either the discussion or conclusion, as I've said, but do not repeat your recommendation in both areas. So if you have discussed that in your discussion, don't repeat in your conclusion. Do not introduce new results, okay, in the discussion. So this is another common mistake that you see a lot of people making. You're trying to, as you do the research, some new findings that has come out, which is unrelated to your actual study. So, so don't try to introduce something unrelated. In a research project, in a survey you do, you will get a lot of findings. You need to pick and choose what you can use. So be wary of mistaking in using the data or interpretation on something that is new to the findings. Use of the first person is acceptable, but not too much. So in most research, if you see, you don't use I, we, he, you don't use that as a first person. You write it as a second person or third person. But much of the first person sometimes will distract the reader, but it depends. In a qualitative research, the tendency is to use that way. So it depends on the publication. Don't overinterpret the results. Interpretation is very subjective, so it's not conclusive. It is just very subjective. Therefore, be careful that you do not read more into the findings than can be supported by the evidence you get. Based on the evidence, this is what you think, but don't overdo it by being very sure of the finding. So remember that data are just data, nothing more and nothing less. So you have to be careful how you interpret. Don't write two result section. Okay, so one of the most common mistake that you can make is when discussing the results of your study is to present a superficial interpretation of the finding that more or less restate the result section of your paper. Okay, don't repeat. As I said, result is result, discussion is discussion. So in your discussion, you have to be more in depth in interpreting why the result was such. If your discussion is just very superficially explaining the result, then it defeats the purpose of having a discussion section. Avoid unwarranted speculation. Okay, this is another thing that you have to remember as well. The discussion section should remain focused on the findings of your study. For example, if you studied the impact of foreign aid on increasing level of education among the poor countries, let's say. So generally, it is not appropriate to speculate about how your findings might apply to populations in other countries without drawing your existing study to support your claim. So you cannot just speculate. So if you feel compelled to speculate, be certain that you clearly identify your comments as speculation or as suggestion for where further research may be needed. So if you have conclusive evidence, then yes, or else, no, you do not do that. Limitation of the study. So again, I keep reminding this, limitation can appear in the discussion or can also appear in the conclusion. Always acknowledge a study's limitation. It is far better to acknowledge this, okay? As I've said earlier, if you don't acknowledge this and then someone else points out there's a problem in your study, then it becomes a problem of accepting the findings of your study. So keep in mind that acknowledgement of a study's limitation is an opportunity to make suggestion for further research. Okay, the moment you say this is my limitation, the further research can look at this limitation. If you do not connect your study's limitation to suggestions for further research, be sure to explain why ways in which this unanswered question may become more focused because of the study. Acknowledgement of a study's limitation also provides you with an opportunity to demonstrate that you have thought critically about the research problem, okay, and understand the relevant literature that has been published about it and correctly assess the method chosen for studying the problem. So a key objective of the research process is not only discovering new knowledge, but also to confront assumptions and explore what we don't know, okay. Claiming limitation is a subjective process, okay, because you must evaluate the impact of those limitations. Don't just list key weaknesses and the magnitude of a study's limitation. To do so, it will diminish the validity of your research because it leaves the reader wondering whether or not in what ways that the limitation of your study may have impacted the findings or the conclusion. So limitations require a critical overall appraisal and interpretation of the impact. So don't just put the limitation that will create a big question mark on the validity of your finding. Okay, so you should answer the questions when in the limitation, whether do this problem with errors in terms of the method or the validity, whether it's impacting or not. Okay, because if it's going to impact on the actual sampling of your findings, that will also impact the validity of your study. So when you talk about this limitation, there are two ways of looking at it. Okay, firstly, you look at the possible methodological limitation, which is the most common that you see in most publication, the sample size, the number of units of analysis you use in your study. Okay, because it is also can create a problem as well. So if your sample size is too small, it will be difficult to find a significant relationship from the data, as certain statistical tests normally require a large sample size to ensure that you have a good representative distribution of the population, and to be considered representative of the groups of people to whom the result can be generalized or transferred. It can also be in the form of lack of available or reliable data. Lack of data or reliable data will certainly require you to limit the scope of your analysis, the size of your sample, or it can be a significant obstacle in findings, a trend, and a meaningful relationship, because you have lack of data to study the longitudinal effect of a particular research. So you need to not only describe this limitation, but also to offer reasons why you believe data is missing or is unreliable. However, don't just throw up your hands in frustration because of this. So use this as an opportunity to describe the need of for your future research. Next one there is lack of prior research studies on the topic. So citing prior research studies forms the basis of your literature review, and it helps lay a foundation for understanding the research problem that you are trying to investigate. So depending on the scope of your research topic, there may be little or there may be little, if any, prior research on your topic. So before assuming this to be true in terms of lack of prior research, make sure that you're really sure that there is lack of, you have done a complete literature study. Okay, so this is important, because I've seen this in many defense, especially for PhD and master student. When I go in as an examiner, the first thing students say is there's lack of research in this field, so your study is unique. Are you sure there's lack of research, or are you sure you have done a comprehensive literature review? So don't make a quick judgment on a certain area without you're very sure that you have actually explored whatever that needs to be explored. So the limitation that you put there, you cannot be accurate if you have not done a proper thorough research in the first place. And the last one is how the data was collected. Sometimes it is the case that after completing your interpretation of the finding, you discover that the way in which you gathered the data have actually has inhibited your ability to conduct a thorough analysis of the result. So that can become a problem. For example, you regret not including a specific question in a survey. I'm sure we all done that. After doing so much of survey, we realize, I forgot to ask this question. Now I don't have data for this question. You've been there. So so it could have, because of that question, maybe it could have helped you to address a particular issue that suddenly have emerged from the study. So that is why sometimes it is very important to do a pilot study, so that you are aware if there are certain areas that is lacking in the survey question. Acknowledge the deficiency by stating a need in future research. So again, if there's lacking, explain that in your as a limitation, and hence there is a possibility for future research. So those are all very methodological in terms of the limitation. Sometimes there are limitations that is very researcher. The problem is because of the researcher. Okay, number one, access, which is the most common. If your study depends on having access to people, access to companies and organizations because you need to do an interview, or access to certain secondary data, annual reports, or financial data. So for whatever reason, access is denied for your study or limited, then the reason for this needs to be described. So if you think that is a problem, explain in your research. Okay, so you must explain if there is a limitation. Longitudinal effect. Okay, longitudinal effect is basically the time frame, the time available to investigate a research problem and to measure the change or stability within a sample. It's sometimes constrained because of certain timeline. Okay, the timeline can also be, if you're doing a project, you have a timeline of the project. By this month, I must finish the project. So you're rushing to get certain data. And sometimes that can be an impact in your finding. So be sure when you're writing a research project or topic, it does not require an excessive amount of time to complete the literature review and apply to make sure that you're able to apply the method to gather and interpret the result accordingly. So you're within the correct time frame. Third one, cultural and other type of bias. We all have biases, okay? All of us, those of you who have done research, you will know that whether we are conscious of them or not. Bias is when a person, place or thing is viewed or shown in a consistently inaccurate way because of our own biasness. It is usually negative, though one can have a positive bias as well. So when you are proofreading your paper, be especially critical in reviewing how you have stated a particular problem, selected the data to be studied, and what may have been omitted, the manner in which you have ordered or arranged the discussion, people or places, of how you have chosen to represent a certain issue that has come out from the study. So there will be some form of biasness sometimes in the way how you explain. So if you are a quantitative researcher and then you have a qualitative person looking at it, there will be certain biases in the way how it is run, is written. So that is why it is always important to choose the right journal or publication to publish. Because if you are a quant researcher and if you publish in qual research, there is a different biases in the way how it is done. It is not wrong or right, but it is a different approach. So you always select the correct way of doing it. Fluency in language. Okay, this is also another common. If your research is focused on measuring the perceived value of certain things, okay, and you're using English, okay, most publications is, let's say we're talking about English, but English is not your first language. Most of us, it's all our second language. We are not a native English speaker, no matter how good our English are, but still there will be some form of deficiency. So this deficiency sometimes needs to be acknowledged, but although in most research, you never say that the limitation of the study is my language, you don't say that, okay? You don't really say that. So you may be limited in terms of interpretation. So maybe when I say fluency in language here, what do I mean by limitation is when you're doing a certain interview, which is not in your native language, or maybe you're trying to interview someone who can't speak English. So there may be certain interpretation that is not accurate or was not translated correctly. So that can become a limitation of the study, because my survey is in Bahasa. I need to speak to the respondent. It's all in Bahasa because they don't understand. And then when they start discussing, and then you start translating to English, you miss out the essence of what they were trying to say. So that can happen in a lot of qualitative research, especially. All right, so that is the main thing that I want to discuss to you on the in writing and outlining a good discussion section. It is not so difficult. As I've said, there are so many ways to do it. You can put result and discussion together, result and immediately discuss, result, immediately discuss, or put all the results together and do the discussion at the later stage. Okay, so two approach for you. It all depends on which publication that you have chosen and what is the norms of the publication. All right, so now I shall hand over to Ms. Fairunizan to take us through on some of the resources that we have for to assist you further in your journey in writing your discussion section. Over to you, Fairunizan.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. For today's topic on writing the research discussion, we will share with you, as mentioned by Prof, library books and also online sources that can help you in writing a good discussion section for your research. So as you can see, the following slides are resources for lesson 8. We have listed for you library books and hyperlinks for online sources that you can refer for further reading and as references when you are writing the discussion section. These resources will also provide you with good examples and steps on how to write an effective discussion for your research. So please take some time to have a look at all the listed resources. Okay, thank you very much. And I will pass back the session to Prof.
Thank you, Fairunizan. So I do hope when you get the slides normally we send you in a PDF form so that you're able to click on some of these hyperlink that's already there. So please do make full use of all these resources. If you need any help, always contact Ms. Fairunizan or the other librarians for you to get access to any online materials, online research publication. There's a lot of databases with publication that can be used for your research. So please do contact her because we are also linked to the library in Wawasan OpenU. So you get access to a lot of resources. So try to use the assistance that we have to help you in writing your publication. All right, then. So is there any questions from anyone who is working on your publication or who are having some issues in the way how you write your research papers? Feel free to raise question now, or even if you think you need help later, please don't hesitate to contact us and we'll be happy to guide you accordingly. Any questions? No. Okay. So we will end the session today. We have one more session in 2 weeks' time that will cover the conclusion and other aspects of writing paper. So stay tuned for next week. For those of you who have missed out today's session, I know there's a lot who registered actually today, 40 over, and we will still provide those who have registered all access to the publication. I'm aware some of you view the recordings, which was given to you immediately after 1 or 2 days, the YouTube recording. So please go through it if you think that you've missed out any session, or if you've missed out the links as well. Don't forget to ask Ms. Azlin, who can provide you there. So I see there's a hand raised by Shamshul. Yes, Shamshul.
Yes, Prof. Can you hear me, Prof?
Yes, I can.
Okay. What about if we follow some format of research paper, whereby the literature review section is not there from introduction?
Okay.
Straight away, the paper jumps into the research methodology, but
Yes.
then the writer include the literature review in the discussion section, like you mentioned just now. So please, sir, please, Prof.
Okay.
Explain it.
So I think that's quite common. If you see, I think we did discuss this when we discussed this in the introduction literature chapter. If you look at a lot of the journal publication, they do not include a heading called literature review. Not all. Many of them do not have a literature review heading. Why? Because literature is supposed to be infused into all the section: your introduction, your methodology, your results, not so much on result, but more on your discussion and also in conclusion. So literature, your literature is being referenced and cited in all the other areas. That's the reason why they never put it as a separate section. But the bulk of the literature will actually appear in your introduction chapter. In the introduction chapter, you will actually cite all the references of the challenges, the problems, and why you are recommending the following objective for the study. What is a gap in the current research? It's all discussed in the introduction chapter. And then you also introduce, this is the conceptual framework for the study at the end of the introduction chapter. And then you say, this is your aim of the study. Then you continue. So the literature will actually appear as part of the introduction. So in your discussion now, you are still pulling out the literature that has actually appeared in your introduction chapter. But at the same time, not necessarily every single literature must be referenced from the introduction. It can be, you can have one or two literature review literatures that was never referenced at the earlier chapter, but then now you think that this finding, you want to refer back to something different that has come out of this study that can justify the particular literature. So don't worry that there is no literature review. It's fine, because literature review is actually there in every chapter. Unlike you're doing a dissertation or thesis, is different. You must have a literature section because the bulk of the literature is thrown inside there. But in a journal publication, normally they don't want, there's a page limitation. So they know that literature is going to appear in all the other chapters. Why do I need a separate chapter on literature review? So that's the reason why they don't put it, but you still must have literature in the other section. I hope it answers you.
Thank you, Prof. Yeah.
Well, welcome. All right. Any other question? For those of you who are doing your continuing your studies, I hope all this the last few sessions will help you. We will be doing more in-depth session as we move on. This is just the first series, that the fundamental of research method is just the first series that we have started. So once this is concluded, then we will work on the next set of talks on different aspects of research. So if you think there are some specific area that you think you want us to help, or you require help, you need to cover, you want us to cover, please don't hesitate to contact us as well. Then we will try to structure something for you. All right then. So we will end the session today. So thank you once again for continuously supporting this event. Please send the links once you get the links if anyone needs help, especially your students. So it's not just for staff, it's open to anyone. So if you think that someone this can be helpful, or you want to use part of this in your class, go ahead. So there is no limitation in how you can use the resources here. All right, so thank you, Fairunizan, for your session today, and thank you all of you for your support, and we will see you in 2 weeks' time. So have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye, Prof. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.